It's a few days now since the subject I'm going to be speaking about, but I do think this one is important because it's about this country's relationship with the European Union going forward. Um, the newspaper sort of lays out this in various articles on a double page, so that's what I'm referring to. And this is from the 29th of August. There was quite a high profile visit from Keir Starmer to Germany to meet Chancellor Olaf Scholz. And the two men seemed to get on well, and there was some positive dialogue, but there are barriers as well. And let me just prefix this video. I'm going to be reading out a bit of this report, but let me just prefix by saying that without question, it is important that this country has good relations with our closest neighbours. I mean, to me, that is just common sense. And one of the things that irritates me about the Brexit leftover, I think the debate itself has been done. I don't think we're going to have a new referendum anytime soon, and I think it would be politically bad for Labour to do that. But never say never. I voted Remain. I have no regrets in voting Remain. I don't love the EU as an institution, but I'm not convinced that leaving the European Union was the right call. I know that there's going to be a small fee now for travel to the European Union. There is going to be a transitionary period. Some are seeing this as a tax, and it doesn't work both ways. So um, EU nationals coming to the UK won't have to pay this for, I forget the acronym now, but it's about €7. So it's not that expensive, but it just kind of reiterates that we have this separation from the bloc. But I'm not convinced it was the right thing to do. I will maintain though that it's in everyone's interest to have a good relationship with neighbours. And the thing that bothers me about Brexit purists is that the slightest hint of a British Prime Minister or a British leader wanting to have good relations with our neighbours, they get into this hysterical thing about, oh, it's reversing Brexit, disrespecting the 17 million people who voted for that, and so on. I mean, when David Cameron, as Foreign Secretary, was talking about having good relations, there were Tory Brexiteers that were immediately accusing him of betraying Brexit. I'm sick of their tunnel vision on this. Um, we should have close relations with our European neighbours. That just makes sense. It doesn't mean it's reversing Brexit. It doesn't mean we're suddenly going to be in kowtow to Brussels. It just means that, we're Western democracies working together. They're neighbouring countries. We have trade with them. It just, not to mention shared history, I just think it is so short-sighted to have this hysterical reaction every time a British leader talks about um, a reset in relations. So I'm going to read out a bit of this because there is differences. Starmer and Scholz are both relatively new leaders. Starmer only in office for a couple of months. Scholz a bit longer, coming up to 3 years, so a little bit longer for him. But Scholz has plenty of problems of his own, which I'll be covering in the next video. The rise of the AFD. There's a lot to say about that, but I'll cover that in the next video. Recently, of course, there was this terrorist attack in Germany in the town of Solingen, 3 people killed. So that's for the next video, so stay tuned. Now, rather than read out everything here, I'm just going to talk a bit about, I'm going to highlight some points. This is a bit of analysis in the newspaper, this is. Closer ties, treaty to focus on economy and defence. Keir Starmer insisted his attempts to reset UK-EU relations do not mean that he is reversing Brexit. The Prime Minister said the new UK-Germany treaty would result in deeper links on science, technology, development, people, business culture, and a boost to our trading relations. Keir added, I'm absolutely clear that we do want a reset. I have been able to repeat that here today, a reset with Europe, a reset with the EU. That does not mean reversing Brexit or re-entering the single market or the customs union, but it does mean a closer relationship on a number of fronts, including the economy, including defence, including exchanges, but we do not have plans for a youth mobility scheme. Scholz said the UK and Germany were good friends, close partners, and trusted allies. He added, "We want to create good relations between the UK and the European Union. Can become better day by day, and we all share an interest." Leaving Berlin, Sir Keir travelled to Paris for talks with French President Emmanuel Macron, and then he stayed in Paris for the opening of the Summer Paralympics there. He was at the side in the audience when Team GB came through. There's a picture of Starmer and Scholz outside the new Reichstag, I think. I should say the Bundestag. That's an anachronism I've just used. The Bundestag. I should know that. I was in Berlin in December. Um, the issue of mobility is key, and I'm going to come into that in a minute. But here's the thing: I can understand anger if there actually was plans to reverse all the key points of Brexit. That would be disrespecting a democratic result of recent history. But what really bothers me, and I'm reiterating this because it's important, is these purist Brexiteers who every time there's talk of having positive relations or working up a strong partnership, they get into the hysterics about, oh, it's reversing Brexit, it's the betrayal of Brexit. Just change the record. I mean, do they want bad relations with France and Germany and the Netherlands and other European countries? I just think it's very short-sighted. Um, and it's this ideological dogma that is kind of put in front of practical realities. That is to say, we need to work with our European neighbours. For the sake of the British economy, we need good relations with our European neighbours. It's just common sense. Um, there are differences on the approach to weapons in Ukraine. Um, there's some other differences. One is the youth mobility scheme. Um, I'm just going to cover two things more, which is the youth mobility scheme and also the small boats. It's a major issue, of course. This piece is by Art Singh. I'll just read it out. It's not too long. Sir Keir Starmer has unveiled a new joint action plan that will aim to intercept small boats being transported through Germany to be used by people smugglers in France to ferry migrants across the Channel. The Prime Minister said developing an action plan could help the countries deal with issues like data sharing, intelligence sharing, what we can do on joint operations both sides of the North Sea. I'm sure you'll appreciate quite a number of the boats that end up on the north coast of France currently, of course, are coming through Germany, he told reporters. Therefore, this isn't a remote action plan, it's actually a concrete one because, as you've heard me say many, many times, I simply don't accept that the people running this trade can't be taken down. And that's why we spent some time in the joint action plan. And what I said before the election is you can either expend your political capital on persuading people the Rwanda plan is worth having, which I don't think it is, or you can spend your political capital on things which is putting our shoulder to the wheel on what practical measures to take down these gangs we can do. Inevitably, that means close working relations with Scholz and Macron. I mean, that's just common sense. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz had previously said the state has to contain irregular immigration so as to not overburden the country. It can and must succeed without questioning a basic law and also international treaties. More than 500 migrants arrived in the UK on Tuesday alone, after crossing the Channel according to Home Office data. The provisional total crossings for 2024 so far is 19,820. Um, it's worth pointing out that regarding Starmer and Scholz, both men come from centre-left backgrounds. They're roughly the same age, early 60s. Um, I think there's no reason they can't have a good working relationship, and I think that is absolutely sensible. I think, when we left the EU, the Brexiteers were saying, oh, we'll leave the EU, but we'll still have good relations with the EU. But I challenge them, prove it. Why is it every time a British Prime Minister, whether it be Theresa May or Keir Starmer, tries to get a good working relationship, there's this knee-jerk reaction of, oh, it's resetting Brexit itself, it's betraying Brexit. I think it's a bit paranoid. Of course, if there actually was to be, Starmer was to sign us up to EU law again or something along those lines to that extent, um, to an extent that was portraying Brexit, then fair enough, there'd be cause for that. But I don't think that's what we're seeing here. Um, it's worth also pointing out regarding immigration issues. Following that attack in Solingen, Schultz took a pretty hard line. This is perhaps for the next video, but he immediately toughened up the immigration situation in Germany. It's not the first terrorist attack by Islamists in Germany, but he immediately said, provisions for migrants will be the basics. Um, I think it was translated as bed, soap, and water, something along those lines. So it's sort of sending out a tough message ahead of that AFD win, but I'll come to that in a minute. Just going to read out a little bit of this youth mobility scheme. Just on a personal note, when I was at university back in the mid 2000s, I was there from 2004 to 2006. Most international students at that time weren't Chinese or Indian, they were from continental Europe. A lot of French students, a lot of German students, a lot of Czech students, particularly those nationalities, but there were others as well. There were Icelanders, there was Dutch, some Italians, quite a lot of Spaniards as well. Not many Asian students at the university I was at Wolverhampton. Maybe it was just that university. Um, and maybe things changed in the 2010s where more students came from China. I'm not sure really, but um, they were beneficiaries of the Erasmus scheme, and British students also studied in European universities. I think it's just tragic that, well, what I'm going to read out is backlash against youth mobility. I mean, we're not talking about illegal migration here. We're talking about young people in education. I'm going to read out the piece on this by Katie Donaldson. For all Sir Keir Starmer's repeated insistence that the UK won't make any concessions on a European Union youth mobility scheme, he knows that it's the key to unlocking any changes to Britain's Brexit deal. That's why a chummy trip to see Germany's Olaf Scholz in Berlin to begin talks on a new cooperation agreement aimed at boosting trade, creating jobs and delivering economic growth in both countries was dominated by questions on whether Starmer plans to give young people in the EU the right to live and work in the UK and vice versa. Before I continue this, one of the negotiations with a trade deal with India last year was the visa situation for Indian students, i.e., the possibility of extending visas. The thing about any sort of negotiations is it's always going to be some degree of compromise, and the question is to what level is a leader prepared to compromise? This is realpolitik. It just doesn't work that you can make demands and not give something in return. That's just the nature of any sort of agreement. So I'll continue. While Starmer has been adamant he won't oversee a return to the free movement of people, the idea of a youth mobility scheme that's more specific, um, which would allow EU citizens under 30 to work and study for a fixed period in the UK, is a key ask from the bloc to unlock UK demands. The UK wants to negotiate changes such as border checks on food products and reducing paperwork for touring artists. Starmer also wants to broker a security pact with the EU, as well as a returns agreement for failed asylum seekers. I mean, I don't know why a Brexiteer would be against that. Surely they'd want failed asylum seekers to return to the EU. But with voters citing immigration as a key concern during the election, Starmer knows to cave in now and allow a youth mobility scheme will prompt a howl of anguish from voters. They include traditional Labour voters who only lent their votes to Boris Johnson to get Brexit done and migration down. We do not have plans for a youth mobility scheme, but do have plans for a closer relationship between us and the EU. That's a bit vague. Starmer said. The planned treaty with Germany has nothing to do with youth mobility. That's why an early post-election meeting with EU representatives, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, firmly rejected any suggestion of wriggle room on the issue, according to those present. Cooper was still smarting from the election result in her Pontefract constituency, where Reform UK, campaigning an anti-migration ticket, took 29% of the seat vote. Labour is fully aware of public sentiment on the issue. We have a very clear objective, getting net migration down, a government source insisted. Labour is now benefiting from falling migration figures, in part from schemes introduced by the Tories. Figures released last week showed a 66% reduction in the number of visas issued to family members of health and care workers, while a ban on most students bringing their families to the UK led to an 81% fall in the number of visas issued to student dependents in the first 6 months of 2024 compared to the same period last year. But it doesn't say if those dependents of students, what nationality those students are. I would be surprised if they were EU students. Now, maybe it's changed since I was at university, but when I was at university, the students in the Erasmus scheme, they weren't bringing their family to the UK. They were here to study. Um, and honestly, I don't know why anyone would resent a French or a Czech or a Lithuanian or Danish student coming here to study. Remember, those students spend money in British shops. It's good for the economy in that sense. And as for net migration, they're not here permanently. I just think it's sad that Starmer has to kind of walk on thin ice with this. I mean, we're not talking here about illegal migrants. We're not talking about the small boats. We're talking about students. I just think there's also a personal basis to this. And, I'm not going to apologize for being sentimental. I had friends at that time from continental Europe. What this would do, is just cut off friendships that people would make with students from other countries. It cuts off life experience. I just think it's hostility to that strikes me as parochial. I understand the issue of the small boats. It's a different issue. But really, I don't understand why anyone would have hostility to a European student studying in the UK or a UK student studying in a European university. Um, for me, that was frankly a sentimental reason alongside practical reasons why I voted Remain, because I remembered my time at university, and I'm not saying it was all a positive experience, but I do remember, the social side of it, and just to cut that off, I just think there's an overt negativity from the Brexiteer side of things. They're ignoring the fact that those students would spend money in the UK, you know, um, adding to the economy. I can understand the issue of students bringing dependents who may not be working and issues like that, but I think Starmer's having this balancing act. He's trying not to put off those Labour voters who may have switched back to Labour, because the Tories would absolutely jump on this. But at the same time, I think he's not a stupid man. I think he knows that there's going to have to be some compromise on this if they really want to improve relations with the EU. Of course, the EU has to work both ways. I mean, if Britons are now being charged to go to the EU on holiday, maybe it should work both ways. So there's issues like that maybe that could be dropped. I think it's called the ETIAS scheme. I can't. I think that's the acronym. But anyway, that's my take on it. There wasn't so much focus on the Starmer Macron meeting, but it was all smiles. Interestingly enough, the 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 archival footage of Starmer meeting Schultz seemed to be a bit more serious than Starmer meeting Macron, so the focus seemed to be on that meeting in Germany. David Lammy, of course, met his German counterpart shortly after taking office. That was after that appalling Russian attack on the Ukrainian Children's Cancer Hospital. Today, another atrocity, 41 killed in Ukraine. Um, so, European politics, immigration is one of the major issues, but the war in Ukraine is very, very much not a side issue. Very, very central. Anyway, stay tuned. I'll make another video regarding the rise of the AfD in Germany and my thoughts on that, my take on that.